When Samia Suluhu Hassan ascended to the presidency of Tanzania in March 2021, she carried promise and hope. Even Tunisians, not just Tanzanians, remarked that here was a woman of calm demeanor, with a modest background and long service, who might inaugurate a more open era for the country. Her composure was legendary, even before she took the top office. She was soft-spoken, deliberate, and thoughtful where her predecessor had been brash and impulsive. In cabinet meetings, she was known for her patience and quiet persuasion, traits that stood in sharp contrast to the late John Magufuli's thunderous, confrontational style. Samia's modest background made her relatable to ordinary people, ordinary Tanzanians. Born in 1960 in Makunduchi, a small fishing and trading town on the island of Zanzibar, she rose not through wealth or family privilege, but through steady work and education. She studied public administration in Tanzania and later at the University of Manchester in the United Kingdom. Credentials earned through discipline, not political inheritance. Before entering politics, she spent years as a civil servant, working in government planning offices and women's development projects, quietly building a reputation for diligence and competence rather than spectacle. And her long service gave her an air of credibility few could deny. She had been a member of parliament, a minister in both the Zanzibar and Union governments, and ultimately vice president under Magufuli, Tanzania's first woman to hold that office. For over 2 decades, she had been part of the machinery of state, navigating its bureaucratic layers, surviving the male-dominated ruling party, and earning a reputation for loyalty and hard work. So when fate and the Constitution lifted her to the presidency after Magufuli's sudden death, many saw her as the right person for a much-needed national healing. An insider who understood the system, but whose temperament promised restraint, inclusion, and political reform. Indeed, she was the first female president of Tanzania and the first Tanzanian born in Zanzibar to occupy the union's top office. Her ascension seemed at once historic and potentially transformative too. She came to power under constitutionally tragic but also opportunistic circumstances. President John Pombe Magufuli died in office on March 17, 2021, officially of heart complications, though shadowed by speculation. Vice President Samia Suluhu was sworn in on March 19, 2021 to complete the second term of the president. For many Tanzanians fatigued by Magufuli's bulldozer-style, combative, heavy-handed dismissive of dissent, her elevation offered the glimmer of a reset. She was seen as less confrontational, more inclusive, and more likely to open the space for political dialogue. At first, She gave signals of reform, lifting the 6-year ban imposed in 2016 by Magufuli on opposition rallies, declaring the right of political parties to hold meetings so long as permission was sought in advance under a 4 arrows agenda, that is, reconciliation, resilience, reforms, and rebuilding. Her advent offered an alternative to the old masculine authoritarianism. Hers was a promise of a model, a president who listens rather than a strong man who crushes. In those early days of her administration, Tanzanians said Samia's message spoke to hope. Citizens longed for governance that would respect pluralism, that would address inequalities, and that would rebuild trust between state and citizen. The fact she was a woman added symbolic weight, a break from the past, a chance for a new leadership ethos. Many expected her to steer Tanzania towards the kind of new African renaissance that emphasizes democracy, transparency, and accountability, not the impulsive one-man show that many had grown weary of. Samia pledged change, though not always in bold, sweeping terms. Her emphasis was on inclusion, on restoring respect for political opposition and civil society, on reconnecting with the international community, and on addressing the real problems of everyday Tanzanians, that is, jobs, infrastructure, education, and health care. And crucially, she made clear that Tanzania deserves leadership that is elected, not imposed by brute force. Leadership that gives voice to its people, not treat them as subject to a monarch's decree. But that promise has, over the intervening years, eroded. The hopeful tone has given way to alarm. The apparatus of repression, long dormant but never extinct, has revived under her watch. Within the past years, the pattern has become unmistakable. Arrest of opposition leaders, disqualifications of credible political opponents, disappearances of critics and activists, and election process manipulation. What was once hopeful reform has turned into a creeping authoritarianism in Tanzania. Consider these examples. The opposition leader, Tundu Lissu, chair of the main opposition party called Chadema, was arrested in April this year and charged with treason, a non-bailable offense, ladies and gentlemen. His crime? He called for electoral reform in Tanzania. Samia's government's campaign to instill fear and suppress dissent is well documented in Tanzania. In the lead up to the October 29 elections, for example, she empowered authorities under her to intensify arbitrary arrests, enforce disappearances, and assaults on activists, all aimed at shrinking civic space. The Legal and Human Rights Center in Tanzania documented about 100 cases of abductions and forced disappearances between 2015 and February of this year, 2025. Activist report scores more in 2024 alone. The narrative of a president who would open up the political arena has collapsed into that of one who monitors, silences, excludes, and disappears her critics. And then came the election held last week. The official result? President Samia Suluhu Hassan declared winner with about 97.66% of the vote. The turnout was placed by the commission at nearly 87%. Yet opposition voices called the figures a mockery of democracy. How in this day and age does a leader legitimately win 98% of the vote? As one opposition spokesman put it, that is a slap in the people's face. It is impossible to square with free and fair competition in Tanzania. The very scenario suggests that this was not an election but a coronation. In a genuinely competitive democracy, you simply do not see a popular leader sweeping nearly 100% of the vote unless the opposition is either utterly marginalized or the vote manipulated. The very statistical improbability signals rigging and intimidation. Indeed, the main opposition parties were all but sidelined. Chadema barred, its leader in detention. The second largest opposition party's candidate was also disqualified for alleged nomination irregularities. Only minor, irrelevant, unknown parties participated in the election. When the major rivals are locked up, the 98% outcome ceases to be the triumph of democracy and becomes the alibi of autocracy. What is most gloomy is a message this sends for the future of Tanzania. If in 2025 this system could produce 97 to 98% for the incumbent, what will happen in 2030? The trajectory is clear. The next election might yield a mere 90%. The one after that perhaps 85%. And by then, the machinery will be fully perfected. Opposition silenced, ballot box engineered, rivals irrelevant, and the incumbent effectively crown the Queen of Tanzania rather than its president. The system is being trained to deliver monarchy by ballot, not by coup. The facade of multi-party contest remains why the substance is removed. The stakes are real. This is not the new African Renaissance Africans hope for. It is rather the entrenchment of one woman's rule, and you find her there, Her Majesty, the Queen of Tanzania, shielded by spectacle, but hollowed by the disappearance of genuine choice. Tanzanians, not just in Uganda and Kenya, watching across the border, but in Dar es Salaam, Mwanza, and Zanzibar, are not yearning for a queen. They are not yearning for a queen. They are yearning for a president who stands before them as their servant. One who is genuinely chosen. One who governs by consent, pluralism, and accountability. A president who understands that legitimacy is not conferred by a commission certificate alone. It is earned in the marketplace of ideas, in the freedom to dissent, and in the fairness of the contest. Tanzanians want a president, not a queen. They want someone who leads by the will of the people, not someone who rules as though crowned. Tanzanians yearn not for a monarch cloaked in illusionary majesty, but for a servant of the republic, one who governs through consent, not decree. What Tanzanians want is a president, not a sovereign, a steward of democracy, not a custodian of dynasty. They seek a voice that echoes the will of the nation, not one that silences it under royal pretense. Tanzanians want a leader who answers to their hopes, not one who demands their submission. One who earns respect through service, not obedience through fear. In short, they are not subjects awaiting instructions from the throne. They are citizens deserving accountability from an elected president. The future of Tanzania, ladies and gentlemen, rests on choice, fairness, and genuine accountability. If what has played out is allowed to mature unchecked, then the promise of democratic renewal in Tanzania will be lost. Not just to Tanzania, but also to all of Africa that watches and hopes with bated breath. Samia Suluhu's rise from vice president to the presidency held promise of change. But that hope has been overshadowed by controlling drift. The 98% victory in the October 29 election in Tanzania is not a sign of popular enthusiasm so much as the culmination of a process that sidelined opposition, stifled dissent, and structured the outcome. If unchecked, this pattern will slide into the very monarchy of power that Tanzanians never asked for. They deserve a president whom they choose, not a queen who chooses them.